Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be taking a look at three important questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last several days. First up, what impact will the new STEM initiatives have on international student interest in the U.S.? Second, how are international undergraduates that are applying to the United States, how are they viewing the U.S. right now? And third, is the Chinese Communist Party's crackdown on Western education backfiring? We'll take a look at these three questions and more on today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup for January 26, 2020. For those that are new to the Roundup, we take the themes and the questions that we cover on Wednesday here during our live chat at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on our Facebook page for SMIE Consulting. We take those from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. In case you're wondering, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education, two cornerstones of our company business. That newsletter comes out Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern to your inbox free of charge. You can subscribe at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Or if you want to check out this most recent edition, I'm dropping the link as well as our website link to the subscribe page in the comments section on the Facebook page. You'll certainly be welcome to check that out for this live event on our Facebook page to get the links to the stories that we're going to be going more in depth to. So these news stories each week, really, we identify some themes on Monday that we want to cover more in depth on Wednesday during this live chat. And this week, as with a lot of what we've been seeing over the last several years, we see a lot of the topics we cover are frankly COVID related. The impact this pandemic, this global pandemic, has had on how we do what we do, and the impact it's had on our education systems, on our immigration systems, on our healthcare, on our just day-to-day lives, is something most people wouldn't have ever imagined would happen to them or to their day-to-day, but it has. The realities have sunk in almost 2 years into this now, but we're also seeing a lot of what we're talking about here is done in light of as it relates to international education, is the impact that changed administrations have on our future of our industry, international education here. And this current administration that was inaugurated just over a year ago now, just over a year ago, they introduced, when they first came into office, a series of actions and executive orders and proposed legislation that was going to basically do a complete 180 from what we had experienced in the previous administration. So we saw the revoking of the travel bans to Muslim majority countries. We saw the Build Back Better Act that contained a number of protections for dreamers and other proposals that would have made F1 potentially dual intent. It was all in an omnibus bill that was submitted, so it really didn't have a lot of chance of success on face value because, and as we've seen this right before the new year, we saw the Build Back Better plan or legislation kind of die in the Senate. So a lot of those elements are not yet law, but certainly the starting point for this administration was one that is dramatically different from the previous administration. So they added in addition to those moves in January, there were a series of other moves that ended the potential removal of DS as a part of F1 student status. We saw H-1B not return to a lottery status instead of by starting salary. We saw a number of pieces like getting on board early for the 2021-22 academic year, making the exemption for online education for international students who are still in the United States to continue. So we've seen a lot of positives. Then last summer we had the renewed commitment to promote international education in the United States and the early signs of potentially a national strategy developing. I don't think we're there yet by any stretch, but certainly there continue to be moves by the administration to reflect an overall positive position related to international ed. And this most recent one that came out on Friday last week. I always wait till the last of the week to do these kind of new bombshell kind of announcements. The administration actions to attract STEM talent and strengthen our economy and competitiveness. And this is the way this fact sheet is written out. It talks about why the STEM fields are so important and what having people from abroad come into our country to contribute their talent. It's led to path-breaking innovations, new creation of new jobs, new industries, new opportunities for Americans across the United States. Clearly, you look no further than the origins, nationalities of some of the top tech firms in the United States. Some of the top businesses in the world are led by former international students. So this statement is certainly, and particularly related to STEM, is reflecting America's longstanding tradition of welcoming the best and brightest and as recognizing it as a global competitive advantage. The statement reflects the continued desire to maintain that competitive advantage. So there are three kind of major pieces that were of the STEM-related issues that this fact sheet addressed in terms of these new policies. First up was the Department of State Educational Cultural Affairs Bureau announcing Early Career STEM Research Initiative. And the language here is to facilitate non-immigrant Bridge USA exchange visitors coming to the United States to engage in STEM research through research, training, or educational exchange visitor programs with host organizations, including businesses. And this new guidance will facilitate new additional academic training time. That's the equivalent of OPT for J visas for undergraduate and graduate students in STEM fields for up to 36 months. So that's encouraging news. You also had the addition of 22 new fields of study to include a lot of data analytics majors that have developed in programs, other biosciences and other environmental related fields that are now part of the STEM list of zip codes that you can have at your institution that are available for international students to attract students who are looking to have that additional work experience. The third piece of this is related to the O1 visa. That's the non-immigrant visa for those with extraordinary ability, kind of redefining the criteria for what constitutes extraordinary abilities. And that could be someone who has a doctorate in a STEM field, that type of thing. So that would create a new category for them to be employed. You see all the other areas that to increase the ease by which national interest waivers can be used for those that are applying for permanent residency, that might be on H-1Bs looking to apply for permanent residency, those with advanced degrees, STEM fields, that type of thing. So encouraging words from this and new policy initiatives from the government, Biden administration. You see NAFTA, not surprisingly, throw their weight behind this push to expand STEM benefits for international education in the United States. So certainly has a lot of positives there. And the other thing you see is the other perspective you want to take in is how well this is being shown in international news in some of our key markets. And I could count between Friday afternoon and Monday morning, there were at least a dozen stories from different countries, sometimes some countries having multiple outlets covering this news, to new effort to retain international science and tech students. This is the title of Biden plans, new effort to retain international science and tech students. That's the headline in the Times of India. That came out on Friday, shortly after the release came out from the administration. So one of the things, interestingly, always see how there's some slight different tones in the way these are picked up or what's emphasized. The end of the first paragraph in this story in India is, this has all been introduced as part of the U.S. government's efforts to counter China, officials said. So it's interesting to see, and India obviously is having its own issues with China, certainly over their social media companies that have their platforms available or banned now in India. So there's certainly some power struggles going on there between the largest two countries in the world, population-wise. So you certainly see that emphasis is in this article is certainly coming out in this Indian article, reflecting why that's such an issue. So we see these steps, of course, that the Biden administration put forth do not require congressional action. Because their legislative program, frankly, with the Build Back Better for legal and illegal immigration, addressing those issues is stalled in Congress still. So these new initiatives will make it easier for immigrants to argue that they qualify for special visas reserved for athletes, researchers, and other extraordinary abilities. That's the O1 category we're talking about. So these are positive steps. So we have to view these from an international ed perspective, from a U.S. central perspective. This is positive news for the United States and will play very well in many of our key markets overseas. So that is certainly something I think will be a boon for us, but it's also up to us now. You have this, how we use this information and communicate it effectively to international students. So obviously, if you have majors that have been that you've added to campus over the last few years, and they are now amongst these 22 new ones that have been added, or if you just want to highlight your own STEM majors on your campus, and if you have a comm plan that is major specific, you can and should be communicating this news about very positive news about the expansion of STEM talent, STEM workability to your prospective students. And that should be one of the key ingredients in your communication plan to prospective students overseas. When you're talking about something that your institution can help these prospective students achieve during their time at your institution, get them prepared for their jobs after their degrees are done, having this 3 years of potential work permission for STEM eligible majors is a game changer. No other country is doing this length of time right out the gate for a STEM degree. Britain does 2 years max. Canada does a year at a time max. But there's, in terms of Australia's, I think, bumping it up to 2 years. But you're seeing our competitive advantage. This is something since 2008, since it was allowed 3 years, it was bumped up from, I think, 25 months to 36. You now have a real competitive advantage that you can and should be using, not just to talk up your own institution, but to talk about the value of the United States. Because one of the things I always talk about is you have to keep in mind that your prospective students are not only applying to you and other U.S. institutions, they are applying to other institutions in other countries. And other countries do a much better job in terms of promoting their own policies, and we do a terrible job of it in the United States. So it's really down to you as an institution. When you have someone on the line that is interested in your school and you're talking about why they should come choose your institution, you're talking about not just why they should choose your institution, why they should choose the United States. That needs to be a part of your communication plan. And these are the kinds of things that when you have these new stories that come out, you should be capitalizing on them and including them in your communication with your future students to show that, hey, it's not just us as an institution that knows that you're valuable, our country values you as well. And that's added value that you want to be highlighting every opportunity you get. So that's what we have for the first question. Second question of the day, how are international undergraduate applicants viewing the United States right now? And we have these similar debates every year. We certainly have seen the United States since the mid-2000s kind of ride a wave of Chinese undergraduates that expanded dramatically from mid-2004 or 5 to 2015, 16. There was a 10-year, 12-year stretch where the numbers just never seemed to stop coming from China. We saw back in the 90s when I started in this business, Chinese undergraduates were very rare on campus. There were hardly any. The focus was really for Chinese students looking to come to the U.S. was for graduate programs. And what had happened, those people from China that came in the 90s and or 80s and 90s returned home, started their own families. their sons and daughters came of age and were looking to go abroad as well, but they were looking much earlier. You saw the Chinese market get much more eager to pursue undergraduate admissions for their sons and daughters, get them a jump start on the job market and preparing perhaps more broadly for employment back home or elsewhere. Then you also saw, after that initial wave of undergraduates from China came, you saw a real expansion in Chinese students coming for high school, boarding school programs. And that wave is kind of coming and has peaked as well. So we're seeing now, at this point in time, over the last 2 years, obviously with the pandemic and previous administration's conflicts with China, this administration still has conflicts, rightly so, with China on certain issues. You see, frankly, very much a disconnect going on with the Chinese audience that have undergone a lot of changes, obviously over the last 2 years with the pandemic and China's policy of zero COVID cases, and the extremes to which they still lock down whole entire cities as a result when there are even minor outbreaks of COVID. The policy, frankly, certainly U.S. eyes, is not sustainable, and certainly 2 years into something, to hear that all cities are still getting locked down, and right now are still locked down in China as a result of outbreaks. That containment strategy clearly hasn't worked. Even countries that had handled COVID very well through the first year and a half of the pandemic have really struggled with Omicron because it's a much more highly contagious variant, and it has greater transmission rates and even though lower impacts on health for the vaccinated. You see a country like China, excuse me, where they've already inoculated 1.3 billion people. Basically their entire population that's eligible for vaccines has had them, and even probably some kids that maybe not eligible for vaccines, at least in U.S. terms, might have already gotten them as well. So you see that country, they're all vaccinated, yet they're still having COVID cases popping up, Omicron cases that are just tearing through some communities. Even though they have had some of the strictest border controls, they're about to host the Winter Olympics in a couple weeks. So we're really seeing some interesting developments here. But one of the factors when we look at each year, particularly recently, in terms of international student interest, is looking at Common App numbers. And Common App tracks and the number of international applicants that they have seen in the last 2 years. The number of international applicants has increased at nearly triple the rate of domestic applicants since the 2019-2020 year. 33% up in international since that time versus 12% for domestic. So the number of top 5 countries from where those students are coming: China, India, Canada, Nigeria, and South Korea were the leading 5. Interesting to see Nigeria on this list. That undergraduates from Nigeria are really starting to consider the United States more strongly than they perhaps ever had before. So we're really encouraged to see those numbers. And this is all in light of the numbers from China continuing to drop. We've seen pre-pandemic 21,231 applicants from China were using the Common App in the 1919-20 academic year. Then this fall, only 17,495 were using it. So down over almost 4,000 in 2 years from China. And that's a marginal drop from last year. I think less than 400 applicants fewer from China this year than last year. And that's saying something that I think is a good sign for international undergraduate recruitment. I think you're seeing a greater diversity of countries in that top 5 is promising to see that it's not, though China is still by and large the number 1. seeing more Indian undergraduates, seeing Canadians. We probably would have already expected to be high on that list. South Korea has always been high in the U.S. terms, but Nigeria is certainly an interesting surprise, a pleasant one, on the Common App top 5 for international applicants for undergraduate admissions. So, and to have the number of international applications basically increasing by more than a third in the last 2 years, even with a decrease of Chinese applicants as significant as it was, means that there's a greater diversity of applicants, an increasing diversity of applicants and number from a greater variety of countries that are applying as undergraduates to the United States using the Common App. So that's encouraging news. So I think there's certainly more positives coming out of this story, even though the focus is on China, and it always tends to be that way because they're the big 800-pound gorilla in the room when it comes to numbers. So that's certainly something we certainly see and understand why it gets included. But the bearing the lead is that really the number of international applicants has increased by a third in 2 years. With a greater, despite the Chinese drops, to have that kind of significant increase is positive for the United States for international undergraduate recruitment. And one of the other reasons I think you're seeing that is over the last 2 years, we've seen U.S. institutions that traditionally were road warriors or hadn't really invested in digital recruitment being forced to go that route to attract international students and to have conversations with students from abroad. You've seen them have to embrace a digital strategy, virtual fairs, and all of these things. And what you'll hear from the greater majority of reps that I've talked to is that they are getting in front of a broader audience than they ever would have before if they had just traveled. They are getting to have different kind of conversations than they do in in-person meetings, but those are the starting points for what become conversations that lead to applicants, that lead to enrolled students. And those are the positives, I think, that we will continue to see in the coming months and years ahead. So undergraduate admissions for international students, I think, is certainly on an upward tick, and you're seeing a greater range of countries that are getting into the mix, and certainly some ones in volume that perhaps you wouldn't expect are now making their voices heard. So good to see those kind of news stories. Now our final question of the day. Is the CCP, Chinese Communist Party's crackdown on Western education backfiring on the government? That's a question that I think it's a little bit counterintuitive when you think about what's happened in politics between the United States and China. China and a lot of Western nations seem to have had their issues with everybody from the UK to Canada to Australia, New Zealand, certainly the United States and other countries over the past 2 to 3 years, even longer, 6 years. You've seen China growing increasingly under President Xi Jinping, have become increasingly interested. It's kind of a dual-edged sword. They're kind of increasingly isolationist in terms of their policies. We certainly saw that this past year with the double reduction policies that were introduced last summer and the impacts that has had on the ed tech space in China, particularly those that are involved in tutoring. We've got the New Oriental story that we broke a few months ago. You now see the actual details of that. New Oriental, largest international ed tech company in China, laid off 60,000 people this past year as a result of the government policy crackdown. So the numbers are pretty stark. Why the government policy crackdown? What are we actually talking about here? This is. It basically ended all its online and in-person K-9 tutoring services. It had been affected by the pandemic and China's crackdown on tutoring companies. This was what the Chinese Communist Party introduced in July 2021 was something called a double reduction policy, which included a ban on for-profit tutoring of school subjects for children and almost instantly wiped out a $100 billion industry. So this is some of these. For example, I've mentioned in the past, my wife has been teaching English to students in China for 3 years up until this summer. when this policy was introduced, it basically prevented, after a certain point, any of her students from using this service because she is based outside of China as a Western influence. So that this is something that has had long-standing impacts in the industry. Obviously, New Oriental is kind of the biggest fish to be impacted by this. And if you look at the report here, indicates that May of 2021, New Oriental had 88,000 full-time employees and 17,000 contract teachers and staff. Now it has around 50,000 staff altogether. So you see where those 38,000 full-time employees and 17,000 contract teachers and staff basically disappeared. Their jobs have disappeared. So you see impacts obviously in the ed tech space in China, but you also see it in the schools. You have part of the other double reduction impact is that a number of international schools in China are forcing to close, or have been forced to close. So you have these parents in middle to upper classes in China that have you've seen these international schools as an early sending their kids to these international schools to give their son or daughter a leg up for university admissions. That you see now Chinese families that they're now torn between the risks of moving overseas and ensuring a Western education for their children. That is something that, and one of the highlights of this South China Morning Post article is that there are companies now that help people emigrate from China, say business is booming. And this is in mainland China as well as Hong Kong. You see with impact of mainland China's policies on Hong Kong are also very much anti-Western, and the forced removal of Tiananmen Square monuments from Hong Kong universities over the past month or two are clear indicators of what the Chinese Communist Party wants for its citizens. So we see a lot of challenges coming in China that are internally driven. We've talked in the past about how, I said the dichotomy of Chinese policy, or double-edged sword of Chinese policy, you've had them becoming increasingly isolationist, increasingly anti-Western in terms of their policies. You also see the flip side of that in terms of them being more expansionist with what they've done with the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to expand their soft power influence as a country throughout the developing world. And this is something that they've invested hundreds of billions of dollars in, or trillions of RMB in, to curry favor in countries and secure influence for the CCP in soft power initiatives. So that's going to continue. We see a lot of what's happened recently, particularly in the last year, that has really kind of trying to put the genie back in the bottle, frankly, when it comes to Western things, Western education especially. You see the parents of their parents are still wanting that Western education and are willing to move, to leave China altogether, and to secure other nationalities' passports. One of the interesting lines in this South China Morning Post article about Chinese parents still wanting that Western education, the lengths to which they're willing to go, is there is a Shenzhen-based company that helps Chinese people obtain Malta citizenship. That their business is up 20% in the past 2 months. Most of the clients are parents who are anxious about the new education policy and the impact and the restrictions that's going to put on their son or daughter's chances of getting a Western education. So there's certainly a market in China, and I certainly think when I say genie, trying to put the genie back in the bottle, that's something that I think certainly didn't work during the Cold War, Radio Free Europe and all of that, in terms of Western ideas getting into the heads of people, and that impact is a wave you can't hold back develops. And I think that's what's happened in China. They promoted Western education or let Western education be promoted for so long. Capitalist societies, their economy has been certainly booming. Controlled economy, planned economy, but now you're seeing challenges again now, economic issues, slowdowns, that type of thing, and the Chinese government's looking for solutions. So it's decision making during the pandemic, and certainly as it's become increasingly clear that they're trying to de-westernize, is having an impact, and we'll see longer term whether that's going to be a positive one for their country or a negative one for the government, because so many of the top people are leaving, are looking to still provide for their sons or daughters in ways that weren't going to be allowed moving forward by the government. So we'll see what the longer term implications are, but certainly China certainly has its issues right now, and de-westernizing is probably one that they probably weren't expecting to have as significant of backlash against. So we'll see what happens. But that's all we have for the Midweek Roundup this week. Appreciate you joining us again, and we look forward to chatting with you in the weeks and months to come. Have a great day.